What she said made the billionaire desire her, so he decided she would be his. She walked into his house as a teacher, but one look was all it took for something uncontrollable to begin to grow. He was arrogant, solitary, walled off. She, too firm to bend. And in that tense silence between one lesson and the next, something was born that neither of them dared to admit. Desire, respect, and a kind of love that scares more than it attracts. Sorry to break the fourth wall, but if you enjoy this kind of story, don't forget to subscribe. Bless this channel by helping us grow, and may your kindness be returned to you twofold. Thank you, and enjoy the story. Exactly 10 years ago, Damien Sinclair lost his wife in a yachting accident, and since then he has transformed into a completely different man. At 38, he has built a financial empire and an equally impenetrable emotional fortress. His mansion, an imposing structure of glass and steel in the rolling hills of Greenwich, Connecticut, perfectly reflects his personality. Cold, immaculate, and isolated, everything in his life is meticulously controlled, from his timed meetings to his precisely prepared meals. The only crack in his armor is his 10-year-old niece, Valentina, a girl with sad eyes and an introverted personality who lost her parents in a plane crash 3 years ago. He took her in as his own, providing everything money could buy but rarely what she truly needed: emotional presence. The mansion's staff watches how he subtly transforms when he's with her. His tone softens, his shoulders relax. Yet, even that love is managed from a distance. One autumn morning, he receives a call from the prestigious private school where the girl studies. "Mr. Sinclair, we need to discuss your niece's performance. She's becoming increasingly isolated, and her grades have dropped drastically in the last quarter." Damien, who solves problems with the efficiency of a calculator, decides this too has a solution. "Send me a list of the best tutors in the country. I'll pay whatever it takes." That evening, while working in his study, he watches Valentina in the garden, alone, curled up on a swing that barely moves. For a fleeting instant, he sees himself in her, a child who learned to hold suffering in silence. He shakes his head, pushing the memory away. "We'll fix this," he mutters to himself, the same way he fixes all his problems, with planning, control, and above all, money. The mansion's gardens, with a panoramic view of the distant New York City skyline, were designed to impress, not to be lived in. The manicured boxwoods and exotic, sterile orchids seem as sealed off as their owner. The servants move like shadows through the marble hallways, trained to be invisible, efficient, and above all, silent. In this palace of glass and silence, emotions are considered imperfections, weaknesses to be contained. From his top-floor office, Damien controls his empire: luxury resorts into Miami, real estate developments into Austin, tech startups into Silicon Valley. His name appears in financial magazines alongside astronomical figures. He is known for his coldness in negotiations, for never giving an inch, for turning everything he touches into gold, except human relationships. After the death of his wife, Isabel, a name he never speaks aloud, he removed every photograph, every visible memory, as if trying to erase not only her physical presence, but the very concept of the love he once felt. The only people who remember the Damien from before are his driver, Hector, who has been with him for 20 years, and Elena, the housekeeper, who watched him grow up, and now sadly observes the void his life has become. The boy is still in there, trapped behind those walls of ice. Elena sometimes tells the cook while preparing dinner, he's just forgotten how to find him. That night, after seeing Valentina from the window, Damien meticulously reviews the girl's school performance reports. Perfect grades until 6 months ago, then a gradual decline in all subjects. The school psychologist suggests emotional blockage and possible unprocessed grief, terms that irritate him for their imprecision, for offering no concrete solutions. He dials his personal assistant's number, despite it being nearly midnight. "I want the complete file on every teacher at Valentina's school, especially the arts and literature faculty, on my desk by morning." While waiting for his assistant to confirm, he pours himself an aged single malt scotch in a cut crystal tumbler that reflects the light like a broken diamond. Neat, no ice. There is no one to tell him to stop, that it's enough, that maybe the problem can't be solved with money. He looks out the window again. Valentina is no longer in the garden. He wonders if she had dinner, if the nanny read her a story, if she asked for him. Probably not. He has ensured all her material needs are met, but he maintains a calculated distance, as if getting too close would crumble the fortress he has so carefully built. "We'll fix this," he repeats, unconsciously touching the wedding ring he still wears, though he has turned it inward so the diamond is hidden against his palm, a private reminder of a promise he can no longer keep, but also cannot forget. The headmistress of the Northwood Preparatory Academy, a doctor, Carmela Evans, called a meeting to discuss Valentina's case. With over 30 years of educational experience and accustomed to dealing with the most powerful families in the country, she knew this meeting would be particularly delicate. "We've hired a new literature and arts teacher," she explained, adjusting her glasses. "Her name is Sofia Morales. She has different methods, but they're very effective. Perhaps she can help Valentina." Damien Sinclair entered the meeting room with the same imposing posture he used in his board meetings. His custom-tailored Oxford grey suit, onyx cufflinks, and gleaming shoes formed the perfect armor of a man who never loses. "How much will it cost for this teacher to give my niece exclusive lessons at the mansion?" he asked, discreetly checking his Patek Philippe, as if the time spent on this meeting had a calculable value. It was then that the new teacher entered the room. Nothing about her was extraordinary at first glance. Natural brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, modest but elegant clothing, no jewelry except for a small silver hummingbird pendant. But when her eyes met the millionaire's, something inexplicable happened. There was a mutual recognition, not of faces but of souls, as if both had detected an adversary of equal stature. "I'm not for sale, Mr. Sinclair," she replied directly, after hearing his proposal. Her voice, with a grounded warmth, held an unusual firmness. "Your money can buy private lessons, but it can't buy results if we keep treating Valentina like a problem to be solved, instead of a child to be understood." The response hit him like a slap. No one said no to Damien Sinclair, especially not a teacher whose annual salary was likely what he earned in a day. Irritation mixed with an uncomfortable curiosity as he watched this woman. Who did she think she was? "I can double your current salary," he offered, leaning forward slightly. "Triple it, if necessary." Sophia held his gaze without flinching. "I can help your niece, but on my terms. At school, where she needs to learn to connect with other children, isolation will only worsen her situation." The headmistress watched the scene, nervous, fidgeting with her faux pearl necklace. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Mr. Sinclair," she intervened, trying to soften the mood. "Ms. Morales has made remarkable progress with other children in similar situations. Perhaps we could—" Damien raised a hand, silencing her instantly. His eyes never left Sophia's. "Do you know who I am?" he asked with a threatening calm. "A man accustomed to everyone saying yes," she replied without hesitation, "and for that exact reason, someone who needs to hear no once in a while." The headmistress held her breath. In her 3 decades as an educator, she had never witnessed such a challenge to such an important benefactor. Damien stood up slowly, buttoned his impeccable suit, and said before leaving, "Everyone has a price. I just haven't found yours yet." Sophia smiled faintly, holding his gaze. "Some values aren't for sale. It's a shame you've forgotten that." When the door closed behind him, the headmistress sank into her chair. "For heaven's sake, Sophia, do you have any idea who that man is? He could buy this school 10 times over if he wanted. Children aren't commodities, Carmela, and that little girl needs much more than money." Meanwhile, in his black Audi R8, Damien remained motionless, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. His driver, Hector, waited patiently for instructions, used to these moments of silence after tense meetings. "Find out everything about Sofia Morales," he finally ordered. "Where she studied, where she's lived, family, debts, everything." In her modest apartment in Astoria, Queens, that same night, Sophia was grading papers when she received a message from Carmela. "Please be careful. That man isn't used to losing." Sophia looked at the photographs on her wall, smiling students, diplomas, memories of a life dedicated to education, and took a deep breath. She knew men like Sinclair, powerful, used to the world bending to their will. Her own father had been like that, until he lost everything in bad investments. What these men never understood was that absolute control was an illusion, and that people were not pieces on a chessboard. The next day, as Sophia entered the classroom, she noticed Valentina in the back row, more withdrawn than ever. The girl was drawing obsessively in her notebook, always the same image, a glass house with a small figure trapped inside. "Good morning, Valentina," she said softly, approaching. The girl barely looked up. It was then that Sophia saw the complete drawing. The glass house was surrounded by a raging sea, with a yacht sinking on the horizon. Suddenly, she understood the real battle ahead, and it wasn't against Damien Sinclair, but against the pain that both uncle and niece didn't know how to face. Meanwhile, on the 50th floor of the Sinclair Tower, Damien received the first report on Sophia Morales. 32 years old, bachelor's degree in education from NUS with a master's in child psychology, daughter of a bankrupt ex-businessman and a mother who died of cancer. No significant debt, no known vices, an impeccable reputation in the educational field for her work with traumatized children. "Everyone has a weak spot," he murmured to himself, gazing at the Harte Manhattan skyline at his feet. "It's just a matter of finding it." Over the following weeks, Damien noticed subtle changes in Valentina. The girl who barely spoke a word at dinner now spontaneously mentioned things from school. One afternoon, she even showed him a sketch for an art project, smiling shyly as she described how Ms. Sophia had encouraged her to express her feelings through painting. "It's interesting," he commented, studying the drawing with professional rather than emotional attention. "You have talent." "My teacher says painting is like talking without words," Valentina replied, looking up at him for the first time in months. Those small transformations intrigued Damien as much as they unsettled him. On one hand, his niece was undeniably showing signs of improvement. On the other, the idea that a stranger was achieving what he hadn't with all his resources was disturbing. One afternoon, checking his email, he found an invitation from the school for an art exhibition featuring student work. Normally, he would delegate such events to the nanny, but something prompted him to attend personally. Northwood Prep had transformed its gymnasium into a makeshift gallery. Proud parents walked through the space, admiring their children's creations, while the young artists enthusiastically explained their work. Damien, in his dark designer suit, stood out like a hawk among sparrows. He stopped in front of a canvas bearing Valentina's name. The painting showed a tiny girl inside a huge glass house, looking out at a vibrant, colorful world. The precision of the details was astonishing. The house had the exact same angular shape as his mansion, and the small figure gazed outward with an unmistakable expression of longing. The colors inside the house were cold grays and blues, while the outside exploded in warm tones. "She has a great deal of talent," a familiar voice said from behind him, "and a great deal of unspoken pain." Sophia Morales had approached quietly, wearing a simple turquoise dress with a handcrafted shawl. Without the formal setting of the school, she seemed more approachable, though just as direct. "You know nothing about us," he replied, instinctively adopting a defensive stance. Sophia's eyes remained fixed on the painting. "I know enough to see that you two are alone, even while living under the same roof." The observation struck Damien like an unexpected punch. No one in years had dared to speak to him so frankly about something so personal. "It's easy to make superficial judgments based on a child's painting," he countered, but his voice lacked its usual calculated coldness. "Superficial?" Sophia pointed to various elements in the painting. "Look at the details, Mr. Sinclair. The windows of the house are perfect, symmetrical, without a single error in proportion, but they have no handles. There are no visible doors. The girl is trapped, but what worries me most," she paused, looking directly at him, "is that she seems to have resigned herself to her loneliness." Damien looked at the painting again, seeing it with new eyes. A lump formed in his throat. "I'd like to invite you for a coffee," he said impulsively, "to discuss Valentina's academic development, of course." To his surprise, Sophia nodded. "All right, but I choose the place." And so the man who usually dined at the city's most exclusive restaurants found himself sitting in a modest coffee shop in a Greenwich village, with walls decorated with black and white photographs of old New York and the unmistakable aroma of freshly ground coffee. "I suggested Pasim," he commented with a hint of irony, looking at the handwritten menu on a chalkboard. "And I declined," she smiled. "I think it will do you good to experience something different. Besides, they make the best apple pie in the city." Over the next few hours, to his own astonishment, Damien spoke more than he had in years. Sophia had a way of listening that invited confidence, as if she genuinely cared about every word. Between cups of coffee, he learned she had grown up in a working-class neighborhood, had lost her mother as a teenager, and had worked as a waitress to pay her way through college. It wasn't easy, but it taught me more than any book, she explained. To see life from different angles, to understand that people are not just what they show on the surface. Why education? He asked. With your intelligence, you could have chosen more lucrative careers. Because I believe I can make a difference, one student at a time, she replied with a conviction he found disconcertingly genuine. Every child is an entire world of possibilities. When the conversation returned to Valentina, Sophia was equally direct. Your niece needs space to process her losses, she explained. Not more things or control. She needs to know it's okay to feel sadness, anger, even joy despite everything she's lost. You think I don't know that? The question came out more vulnerable than he intended. I've consulted the best psychologists. But have you processed your own loss? She asked softly. Damien visibly tensed. My wife died 10 years ago. That's in the past. And yet you still wear your ring even if you turn it inward, she observed, gesturing to his left hand. Time only heals when we allow ourselves to feel, Mr. Sinclair. The silence that followed was charged with conflicting emotions. As he listened to her, something inside Damien stirred restlessly. It was an almost forgotten sensation, a genuine interest in another person, not as an asset to be acquired, but as a complex human being. The feeling both scared and fascinated him. As they parted ways in front of the coffee shop, the sun was beginning to set, bathing the streets of New York in a golden light. Thank you for your time, he said formally, extending his hand. She took it briefly. Valentina has a poetry reading next week. You should be there. I have an important meeting that day in San Francisco where there are always important meetings, Mr. Sinclair. But Valentina's childhood won't wait for your schedule to clear up. As she walked away, Damien watched her blend into the evening crowd. For the first time in a long time, he felt something he couldn't name, an emotion he couldn't control or categorize on a spreadsheet. That night, standing before his study window, looking at the city lights below, he unclasped his designer watch and held it in his palm. That single timepiece cost more than Sophia Morales's annual salary. Yet she possessed something he had long lost, something his money couldn't buy. Hector, he called his assistant, cancel my trip to San Francisco next week. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning. High-quality ivory paper with the Sinclair Group logo embossed in gold. Inside, a meticulously drafted contract, private tutoring 3 times a week at the mansion, with an annual salary equivalent to 10 times what Sophia earned at the school. A sum that would allow her to pay off all her debts, buy a decent apartment, and secure the medical treatment her father desperately needed. Sophia read it twice before putting it back in the envelope. That same day, after class, the courier received her reply, a simple "no thank you" handwritten on a school notepad. In his office at Sinclair Tower, Damien Sinclair received the news with a mixture of disbelief and fascination. No one, absolutely no one, refused his offers. Investigate her more thoroughly, he ordered his head of security, a former military man with an impassive face. I want to know everything, where she lives, who she talks to, what she eats, what she owes, everything. The report arrived 3 days later. Sophia Morales lived in a small apartment in Astoria, a neighborhood that had seen better days. She had a sizable student loan still outstanding. Her 68-year-old father resided in a modest retirement home in Florida, with heart problems that required expensive medication. She had no known partner. Her only luxuries seemed to be books and occasional visits to museums. With what I offered her, she could solve all her problems, Damien muttered, looking at the photos of the worn-down building where she lived. Why turn it down? For weeks, Damien found himself thinking about her at unexpected moments. While closing a multi-million-dollar deal, while swimming in his private pool, even during a dinner with foreign investors, the image of Sophia, with her dignity intact despite her circumstances, had become an obsession. Meanwhile, Valentina flourished under Sophia's guidance. The girl had started participating in class, had made 2 friends, and had even won an award for her poem about the sea, a moving piece where the waves kept secrets and memories. The sea took my Aunt Isabel, Valentina confessed to Damien one night, with a frankness that disarmed him. But Ms. Sophia says it also brings back treasures if we know how to look for them. That same month, an unexpected crisis hit Sophia. Her father suffered a heart attack that required a prolonged hospital stay. The medical bills piled up quickly, exceeding her savings. To make matters worse, She returned to her apartment one afternoon to find an eviction notice. The building was being demolished to make way for a luxury development. Damien knew about it before anyone else. The night Sophia received the eviction notice, an identical envelope to the first one was delivered to her door. This time she called him directly. "Are you having me watched?" she asked without preamble when he answered. "I'm offering you a solution," he replied with the calm of someone who knows he holds all the cards. The silence on the other end of the line was long. Finally, she spoke in a controlled voice. "I accept the tutoring position, but with my conditions. Twice a week after school hours. A fair compensation, not that absurd figure you're offering, and I have 3 non-negotiable terms." Damien smiled into the phone, savoring his partial victory. "I'm listening. First, you do not interfere with my teaching methods. Second, my personal life remains completely separate from this agreement. Third, Valentina continues to attend school normally, maintaining contact with other children. Is that all? And I want a contract that clearly stipulates I can terminate the agreement at any time if I feel it's not working for Valentina." Damien agreed to everything, far too easily for Sophia's liking. The next day they signed the agreement, and the private lessons began. For the first month everything went surprisingly well. Twice a week Sophia arrived at the mansion at 4 in the afternoon. The sessions with Valentina included literature, art and conversations that gradually helped the girl express her repressed grief. Damien kept his distance, appearing only occasionally to say hello or ask about her progress, but the apparent calm was deceptive. The partial victory did not satisfy Damien. Instead of quelling his obsession, Sophia's intermittent presence in his territory had intensified it. There was something in the way she moved through the mansion without being intimidated, in the way she spoke directly to the staff without any air of superiority, that fascinated him. This woman was an enigma his money had not fully deciphered. One morning in May, the bombshell dropped. Dr. Carmela Evans, the head mistress of Northwood Prep, called an urgent staff meeting. With trembling hands, she announced the news. The school had been acquired by the Sinclair Group. There would be administrative changes, but the educational policies would remain intact, for now. That afternoon, Sophia stormed into the office Damien had established in the school's administrative wing. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her eyes bright with indignation. Her usually controlled voice vibrated with emotion. Damien watched her from his Italian leather armchair with a studied calm that contrasted with her agitation. "Because I can," he replied simply, pouring himself a glass of mineral water. "No, the real reason," she insisted, approaching his desk. "This school has been an independent institution for 50 years. Why buy it? Is this another form of pressure, of control?" The silence between them vibrated with an almost electric tension. Damien rose slowly, closing the distance between them. He could smell the subtle scent of jasmine that emanated from her, see the indignation that made a small vein pulse in her neck. "You challenge me," he admitted finally, with an honesty that surprised even himself. "No one challenges me." Their eyes met, a mutual recognition of the strange power dance they had been performing for months. "Maybe that's exactly what you need," she replied, holding his gaze. "Someone who isn't dazzled by your empire, someone who sees the man behind the fortune." Without waiting for a response, Sophia turned on her heel and walked out of the office, leaving behind a subtle scent and a sentence that would echo in Damien's mind for days. That night, as he watched the city lights from his glass mansion, Damien acknowledged a disturbing truth. For the first time in a decade, he felt something beyond the meticulous control with which he had governed his existence. It was a turbulent and dangerous feeling, a mixture of obsession, admiration, and desire that he couldn't label or control. And that, more than any challenge to his authority, was what truly terrified him. Kevin Price, the academic coordinator at Northwood Prep, watched the dynamic between the teacher and the millionaire with growing unease. A former college classmate of Sophia's, he had always harbored unrequited feelings that now curdled into bitter resentment. Why was she, who had always despised privilege and power, so magnetically drawn to the most arrogant man who had ever walked the school's halls? In the first few weeks after the surprising acquisition of the school, Kevin kept his distance, observing. But when Sophia's regular visits to the Sinclair mansion began, his resentment crystallized into something darker. It started subtly, insinuations during faculty meetings, seemingly innocent questions about the ethics of private tutoring, veiled comments about inexplicable favoritism. Like water dripping persistently on a stone, the seeds of doubt began to sprout. "Doesn't it seem odd?" he suggested one afternoon in the teacher's lounge. A teacher who publicly refuses the millionaire, then suddenly accepts private arrangements. And curiously, the niece starts getting exceptional grades. Soon, the rumors spread like wildfire. The teacher was selling more than her pedagogical skills. The millionaire had bought her along with the school. Valentina was receiving preferential treatment due to the special relationship between her uncle and the teacher. Sophia faced the stares and whispers with professional dignity, but the situation became untenable when she discovered that Kevin had altered one of her quarterly assessments, changing the grades she had assigned to Valentina. She confronted him in his office, closing the door behind her. "This is personal, and you know it," she said, placing the altered documents on his desk. "You changed the grades I assigned." Kevin crossed his arms, a cold smile not reaching his eyes. "It's about academic integrity," he retorted. "We all see how you look at him, how he follows you with his eyes during school events. Do you think no one notices the luxury car waiting for you after school?" "I don't owe anyone an explanation for my private life, especially not you," Sophia replied, her voice controlled but firm. "What I do outside of school hours is none of your business, as long as I fulfill my professional responsibilities here." "Professional?" Kevin let out a short, bitter laugh. "Professionalism implies objectivity, Sophia, and we all know you lost that the moment Sinclair walked into the picture. I will not let you tarnish my reputation because of some personal grudge. Don't you dare alter my assessments again." Kevin stood up slowly, approaching her with an expression Sophia had never seen before. "If you don't stay away from him, I'll have to take this to the educational board. I have proof, Sophia, proof that would seriously compromise your career." "Proof?" she repeated, incredulous. "Of what exactly?" "Emails, texts between you, pictures of you leaving his building at questionable hours." "That's impossible," Sophia replied, though a chill ran down her spine. "That proof doesn't exist because there is nothing inappropriate between us." "The board will decide that," Kevin threatened, a malicious glint in his eyes. "Unless you reconsider your position, of course." What Kevin didn't realize was that Damien Sinclair, who had discreetly installed security systems throughout the school after acquiring it, was hearing every word through the hidden cameras in his private office at the other end of the building. The millionaire's face, normally as impassive as an icy mask, contorted into an expression of cold, calculated rage. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair until his knuckles turned white. "Hector," he called his personal assistant, not taking his eyes off the screen where Sophia was facing the threat with dignity. "I want everything on Kevin Price, from kindergarten to today, especially any irregularities in his academic or professional history." "Any limits, sir?" Hector asked, accustomed to these instructions. Damien turned slowly in his chair, with an expression that made even his experienced assistant take a step back. "None," he replied in a dangerously soft voice. "Absolutely none." That night, as Sophia graded papers in her small apartment, she received a text from an unknown number. "Be careful with Kevin. Don't trust anything he offers or shows you. DS." The teacher stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to feel about this unexpected protection. On one hand, the idea of being watched disturbed her. On the other, she felt a strange sense of security she had never felt before. Meanwhile, in his private office at Sinclair Tower, Damien meticulously reviewed the file on Kevin Price that his investigators had begun to compile. In his years of building an empire, he had learned that everyone had weak spots. It was just a matter of finding them. But this time was different. This wasn't a hostile takeover or a business negotiation. It was something personal, primal, a protective impulse he hadn't felt in years. The idea of someone trying to harm Sophia awakened a fury in him he thought had died with Isabel. "No one threatens her," he muttered to himself as he looked out at the illuminated city from his window. "No one." At Northwood Prep, oblivious to the coming storm, students were preparing for their spring cultural festival. Valentina, for the first time since losing her parents, had asked for a role in the school play. The character she would portray, a girl who learns to face her fears and find her voice. In less than a week, Kevin Price's professional world crumbled like a house of cards in a relentless gust of wind. On Monday, the board of directors of Northwood Prep announced an internal audit of all departments. On Tuesday, it was leaked that several academic performance reports showed irregularities. On Wednesday, 3 female teachers came forward with testimonies about inappropriate comments they had received from Kevin. On Thursday, the National University issued a statement that it would be reviewing his doctoral thesis following accusations of substantial plagiarism. By Friday, Kevin was called into the office of the new administrative director, a man loyal to Damien Sinclair, where he received his letter of immediate termination. In less than 5 days, he had lost his job, his professional reputation, and even his teaching license was in the process of being revoked. "It's like someone pushed a button to destroy him," a teacher commented during lunch as they all looked at Kevin's empty desk, his belongings already packed in a sealed cardboard box. Sophia heard these comments with a mixture of disbelief and growing suspicion. She had known Kevin since college. He was ambitious and could be unpleasant when he didn't get what he wanted, but document forgery, academic plagiarism. It seemed too much of a coincidence that all these discoveries surfaced right after their confrontation. That afternoon, after her classes ended, she drove her old Volkswagen to the Sinclair mansion. No session with Valentina was scheduled, but she knew Damien would be there. The security guard, already familiar with her, allowed her access without questioning the reason for her unscheduled visit. The mansion, as always, greeted her with its imposing coldness: glass walls that reflected the evening light, Italian marble floors that multiplied every sound, a sterile perfection that seemed to deny any sign of human life. Only the east wing, where Valentina had her rooms, showed signs of warmth, drawings on the walls, books in disarray, small traces of existence. Damien was in his private study, reviewing documents with a half-finished glass of cognac on his desk. When he saw her enter unannounced, his eyebrows arched slightly, the only visible sign of surprise on his perpetually controlled face. "Sophia," he said, standing up, "I wasn't expecting you today." "You did it," she stated without preamble, closing the door behind her. "You destroyed Kevin. It wasn't a question." The certainty in her voice filled the room, bouncing off the polished surfaces like a challenge. Damien watched her for a moment before walking to the carved mahogany bar that occupied a corner of the office. With deliberately slow movements, he poured himself a 30-year-old single malt scotch, not offering her one. "He threatened you," he replied simply, taking a small sip. "No one threatens what is mine." Sophia's face flushed with indignation. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with barely contained rage. "I am not yours," she retorted, moving until she was just a few feet from him. "I am not property. I am not a trophy. I am not something that can be owned." The evening light pouring through the windows enveloped them both in shades of gold and copper, as if they were in an old photograph. The tension between them was almost visible, an electric current charging the air. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she continued. "You destroyed a man's career, his reputation, his entire life." Damien took another sip of his scotch, with a dangerous, almost predatory calm. "He had skeletons in his closet," he replied in a soft voice. "I just turned on the lights." "And you don't?" she challenged. "Is your empire built solely on good intentions and transparent methods?" Something flashed in Damien's eyes, a spark of recognition, perhaps of respect for her audacity. "The difference is I never pretended to be a saint," he replied, placing his glass on the desk with pinpoint precision. "Kevin built a career preaching integrity while completely lacking it." "Why?" Sophia insisted, taking another step toward him. "Why go to so much trouble for someone so insignificant to you?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever. Damien looked at her with an intensity that would have made anyone else retreat, but Sophia held his gaze without flinching. "Because when I learned he tried to hurt you," he finally answered with a raw honesty that surprised her, "I realized I would kill for you, and that terrified me." The glass in his hand trembled slightly, betraying the emotion boiling beneath the controlled surface. For a fleeting instant, the mask of calculated indifference slipped, revealing the vulnerable man underneath. "No one has made me feel that way in 10 years, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "No one has made me feel anything at all." Sophia stood motionless, absorbing the impact of that unexpected confession. The rage that had driven her there began to transform into something more complex, a mixture of compassion and an understanding she hadn't anticipated. "That doesn't justify destroying someone," she finally said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "I'm not looking for justification," he replied, stepping closer. "I'm just telling you the truth. For the first time in a long time, I'm being completely honest with someone." The confession shattered something between them, an invisible barrier that had until then kept their worlds separate. The teacher saw for the first time beyond the mask of power. She saw the man devastated by loss, hidden behind financial empires and glass walls, and he saw in her not just an adversary, but someone who looked at his rawest truth and still stood her ground, unafraid. "I thought I could control everything," he continued, looking out at the New York City skyline stretching endlessly beyond the windows. "My empire, my life, my emotions. I thought absolute control would protect me from pain, but then you appeared, challenging me at every turn, seeing through my facade as if it were glass. As if it were glass." Sophia walked towards the immense floor-to-ceiling window, her silhouette framed against the panoramic view of the sprawling megalopolis as it slowly ignited with light while the sun descended. Millions of lives in motion, thousands of stories intertwining, and here they were, two solitary souls recognizing themselves in the midst of their mutual loneliness. The city below was a galaxy of amber and diamond, a testament to human endeavor and connection, yet from this height, it felt distant, abstract. It was a view Damien had cultivated, a vantage point that reinforced his detachment. Tonight, for the first time, it just made him feel small. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, the confession a mere whisper that seemed to cost him a significant physical effort. His voice, usually a tool of command, was raw and uncertain. "I don't know how to feel without controlling, without a strategy." The sheer vulnerability in his tone, so utterly alien in a man accustomed to dominating every situation, every negotiation, every room he entered, touched something deep within her. It wasn't pity she felt, but a profound resonance. Sophia turned to face him, seeing not the formidable billionaire on the cover of Forbes, but the wounded man who had constructed monumental walls to shield himself from a world that had once shattered him. "Nobody does," she answered softly, her voice a balm in the cavernous, silent room. "Nobody has the manual. We just try. We get it wrong. We try again. That's all there is." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable or tense. It was a space of mutual recognition, a quiet armistice. Two people who, despite hailing from completely different worlds, one of inherited wealth and ruthless acquisition, the other of public service and intellectual empathy, shared similar scars: the hollow ache of loss, the paralyzing fear of vulnerability, the profound loneliness that comes from keeping others at a calculated distance. Outside, the city began to truly blaze, millions of tiny lights defying the encroaching darkness. Inside, something new was beginning to take shape between them, something fragile and undefined, yet undeniably real and potent. It was a connection forged not in boardrooms or classrooms, but in the crucible of shared pain and reluctant honesty. "Valentina asked about you yesterday," he said, shifting the topic, but not really. The subject was still connection, still the life that was re-entering his sterile world. "She wants to show you her new project for the art exhibition." "I'll come tomorrow," Sophia replied, her professional warmth returning but now tinged with a new personal layer. "She has an extraordinary talent. It's more than just skill. She sees the world with an artist's soul, like her mother," Damien commented, a wave of nostalgia washing over him, a feeling he rarely permitted himself. "My sister. She painted constantly. Isabel collected art. I only know numbers and strategies, assets and liabilities." It was a self-assessment he'd made 1,000 times, a label he'd worn like armor. "You're more than that," Sophia countered gently but firmly. "You've just forgotten the other parts of yourself. They're not gone, just dormant." Their eyes met again, and for a long moment the masks fell away completely. They were not the idealistic teacher and the ruthless tycoon. They were simply a man and a woman, acknowledging the shared, flawed humanity that bound them together far more tightly than any of their differences could ever pull them apart. "You should go," he said finally, though his posture, his gaze, the very air around him screamed that it was the last thing he wanted. "It's getting late." Sophia nodded, understanding that they both needed time and space to process what had just happened between them, the truths exposed, the vulnerabilities revealed. It was too much, too fast to absorb in one evening. "One more thing," she said, pausing at the heavy oak door. "What you did with Kevin, don't ever do something like that for me again. I don't need that kind of protection. I can fight my own battles." He looked at her, his expression a complex mix of frustration and grudging respect. "I can't promise you that," he answered with stark honesty. "My instinct to protect what matters to me is absolute." but I will promise to try and listen to you before I act." A fleeting, genuine smile crossed Sophia's face. It was a small beginning, a tiny concession from a man who never conceded anything. It was a first step towards something neither of them could yet name. As she drove back to her apartment in Queens, under the vast, star-dusted sky of the greater New York metropolitan area, Sophia reflected on the strange, unpredictable turn her life had taken. She had walked into the Sinclair mansion as a warrior, ready for battle against a titan of industry, and she was leaving with a much deeper, more complicated understanding of the man she thought she knew. What she didn't know was that back in his study, Damien remained standing by the window, watching the city lights with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, the timid, terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't condemned to live out the rest of his life in a prison of glass and solitude. The private lessons continued, but a fundamental tectonic plate had shifted in their relationship. The volatile dynamic of power and defiance that had characterized their initial encounters had transmuted into something more subtle, more profound, and infinitely more dangerous to them both. Damien no longer tried to buy or possess Sophia. He was trying, clumsily and with great difficulty, to learn from her. He became a covert student of human connection. He would observe with intense focus how she communicated with Valentina, how she created spaces for emotional expression rather than demanding immediate, quantifiable results. He marveled at how she responded to the girl's non-verbal cues, offering comfort not with platitudes, but with a shared silence or a simple, understanding nod. During the first few weeks after their confrontation in the study, Damien maintained a physical distance during the tutoring sessions. He would confine himself to a brief formal greeting or a perfunctory question about their progress. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, he began to linger. He would stay in the room for longer periods, pretending to work on his laptop from a wingback chair in the corner, while his attention was entirely focused on the dialogue between Sophia and Valentina. "You don't need to understand the poem perfectly," Sophia explained to the girl one afternoon, as they analyzed a few verses from Robert Frost. "Poetry is like a secret whispered from the writer to the reader, and it reveals itself differently to each person. What do you feel when you read these lines about the road not taken?" Valentina was quiet for a long time, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Sadness," she finally answered, her voice soft, "but also something like hope. Like when it's raining but you know the sun will come out afterward. It's sad because he can't go back, but it's hopeful because he chose his own way." Damien looked up from his computer, genuinely stunned by the depth of her observation. Valentina, who had always been such a quiet, pragmatic child, was beginning to articulate emotional nuances he had never perceived in her before. Under Sophia's gentle guidance, she was finding a new language for her inner world. One afternoon in late May, Connecticut was ambushed by one of those sudden, violent thunderstorms that transform the manicured suburban streets into churning rivers and the sky into a bruised canvas of lightning. Damien returned home earlier than usual, soaked despite his umbrella and the short dash from the car to the massive front door. Mr. Sinclair, Elena, the housekeeper, greeted him, taking his wet coat with a knowing look. "The teacher and the little one have been in the library for hours. I took them some hot chocolate and those cinnamon rolls Valentina likes so much." Damien nodded, grateful for the discretion and care with which Eleanor handled these new developments. Unlike the rest of the staff, who maintained a reverential, almost fearful distance, the woman who had seen him grow from a boy into this formidable, isolated man allowed herself small familiarities that he secretly cherished. He made his way toward the library, an immense two-story room with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling oak shelves, filled with leather-bound books that no one ever read. Another acquisition meant to impress, a symbol of intellectual depth he felt he lacked. The heavy door was slightly ajar. He was about to announce his presence when the sound of laughter stopped him cold. Laughter in his house. A sound so alien within those walls that for a moment he thought he had imagined it. He peeked silently through the opening. The scene that greeted him left him motionless, a statue in the grand hallway. Sophia and Valentina were sitting on the floor, sprawled across the priceless Persian rug, surrounded by open books, sheets of paper, and colored pencils. The professor had her hair down, falling in natural waves over her shoulders. He had never seen her like that, without her usual professional severe bun. She looked younger, softer, more carefree. Valentina was holding an illustrated book of mythology, pointing at something on a page, while they both laughed with a shared complicity that made a tight, unfamiliar knot form in Damien's throat. His mansion, always as silently perfect as a museum, felt alive for the first time in a decade. The sound of the relentless rain drumming against the tall, arched windows created an intimate, cozy atmosphere, a small universe where laughter and books were transforming the cold mausoleum into something that felt achingly like a home. He remained frozen in the doorway, invisible to them, absorbing the scene. Valentina was gesticulating animatedly, explaining something about Greek gods and constellations. Her face, usually so reserved and somber, was illuminated with enthusiasm. When had she learned so much about mythology? When had she started to display that sparkle in her eyes, a sparkle that reminded him so painfully of his late sister? And then Zeus turned her into a bear and put her in the sky, to protect her forever, Valentina exclaimed, pointing to an illustration of Ursa Major. It's a beautiful way to explain the stars, don't you think? Sophia replied, her voice warm. The ancients looked at the sky and saw stories. Sometimes I think that's what makes us human, our need to find meaning, to connect the dots until they form recognizable figures. Can we see the stars tonight if it stops raining? Valentina asked, her eyes wide with hope. That will depend on your uncle, Sophia smiled. But we could certainly try next time if the sky is clear. Something in the domesticity of the scene, in the effortless way Sophia had integrated herself into Valentina's life, stirred a complex emotion in Damien that he couldn't name. It wasn't just admiration or attraction, it was something deeper, a profound longing for something he had forgotten he even wanted, a real home, not just an architectural demonstration of power and wealth, a place filled with life, not just objects. He retreated silently, deciding not to interrupt their moment. He would wait in his study until the session was over. Hours later, when the rain had subsided to a gentle drizzle and the night sky over Greenwich was slowly clearing, Damien heard the familiar soft knock on his study door that signaled Sophia's departure. "Come in," he answered, closing a folder of documents he had only been pretending to review. Sophia entered, her hair once again neatly pinned up, her expression professional, though something in her eyes remained softer, more relaxed than at the beginning of their encounters. "Valentina has made tremendous progress," she commented. "Her essay on Greek mythology is turning out to be excellent." Damien nodded, rising from his chair. "I'll walk you to the door." They walked together down the long marble corridor, their footsteps echoing in the nocturnal silence. The rain had left behind a fresh, earthy scent that drifted in through the slightly open windows. When they reached the grand foyer, instead of his usual formal farewell, Damien stopped her with a question. "How do you do it?" Sophia looked at him, her expression quizzical. "Do what exactly?" "Connect. With her. With people," he answered, with an honesty that surprised even himself. "People open up to you. They show you parts of themselves they hide from the rest of the world. It's a gift." She smiled, a rare and genuine gesture that transformed her face, making her seem younger and more vulnerable. "I listen," she answered simply. "I truly listen, without thinking about what I'm going to say next, without planning how to use the information. I am present." The simplicity of the answer stood in stark contrast to its profound depth. Damien contemplated her, fascinated by this woman who consistently defied all his expectations and dismantled all his preconceived notions. "It sounds simple," he commented, his voice low. "It is. And at the same time, it's the hardest thing in the world," she replied, "especially for someone accustomed to controlling every variable, every outcome." Their gazes met, locked in that silent understanding that had begun to blossom between them. There was no accusation in her words, only a frank, compassionate observation. "I'll try," he promised. And he did. Over the following weeks, Damien began to practice this new, difficult art of attention. He started having dinner with Valentina regularly, without his phone, without an agenda, just talking. At first, it was excruciatingly awkward and artificial. He didn't know what to ask, how to respond to her comments without sounding condescending or distant. "How was school today?" he would ask mechanically. "Fine," Valentina would reply, pushing food around on her plate. The silence would stretch between them like a vast, empty canyon, but he persisted. Night after night, meal after meal. Gradually, he started asking more specific questions, remembering details from their previous, stilted conversations. Did you finish the drawing of the constellations you mentioned yesterday? Did the science teacher talk about that experiment with the plants you were interested in? Little by little, Valentina began to respond with more than monosyllables. She told him about her friends, her classes, her art projects. One night she brought her sketchbook to the table, something she had never done before, and showed him her most recent drawings. "These are very good," Damien said, sincerely impressed. "You have a natural talent like your mother." Valentina's eyes widened in surprise. "My mom used to draw?" Damien felt a sharp pang of guilt. He realized he had almost never spoken to her about her parents, as if even mentioning their names was too painful, a risk to his carefully constructed emotional dam. "All the time," he replied, allowing himself the bittersweet luxury of memory. She had notebooks filled with sketches. "Your grandfather wanted her to study business to join the family company, but she insisted on going to art school. She was stubborn, like you." Valentina smiled, a smile so hauntingly similar to his sister's that Damien felt time fold in on itself. "Do you have any of her drawings?" the girl asked timidly. "I think I saved some boxes in the storage unit," he admitted. "We could go look for them this weekend if you'd like." As these conversations became more natural, Valentina also changed. She smiled more, talked more, and even began to question things and challenge small household rules she had previously accepted in silence. "Why can't we have dinner on the patio sometimes?" she asked one evening. "The weather is so nice and we never use that space." In the past, Damien would have dismissed the idea with some excuse about tradition or decorum, but this time, surprising himself, he replied, "There's no reason at all. We can have dinner out there tomorrow if you like." One evening, while they were sharing dessert on the newly discovered patio, Valentina looked at him with the unnerving frankness unique to children. "You like Ms. Sophia, don't you?" The question caught him completely off guard. He nearly choked on his ice cream. "Why would you say that?" "Because you seem less closed when she's around," Valentina replied, choosing her words with care. "Like something inside you wakes up." Damien was speechless at the girl's sharp perception. In that moment he understood that while he had been busy trying to fix Valentina, perhaps she had been silently helping to fix him. "She's a special person," he finally answered, with a level of honesty he had never before permitted himself. "She helps me see things I had forgotten." Valentina nodded sagely, as if confirming something she already knew. "Me too." That night, as Damien looked out at the distant glittering skyline from his patio, he thought about all the ways his life had changed in the past few months. His house, once a monument to empty perfection, was beginning to show signs of life. Books left out of place, drawings taped to the stainless steel refrigerator, fresh flowers in vases that Valentina insisted on changing regularly. And he himself was changing. The armor he had built over a decade was still there, but now it had cracks through which light was filtering in, small fissures through which he could glimpse the possibility of a different life, a life where absolute control ceded space to vulnerability, where power was measured not in acquisitions, but in genuine human connections, a life that until recently he hadn't even known he desired. The call came at 3 in the morning. The shrill ringing of the phone sliced through the mansion's silence like a sharpened knife. Damien, always a light sleeper, was awake at the first sound. Something about the nocturnal summons triggered a primitive alarm in his brain before he even answered. "Mr. Sinclair." The voice on the other end belonged to Lucia, the mother of Renata, Valentina's new friend. "I'm so sorry to call at this hour, but Valentina is very sick. She has a very high fever, and she just had a seizure. The ambulance is on its way." It was the first time Valentina had ever slept away from home since coming to live with him, a sleepover that had taken weeks of her mustering the courage to ask if she could go, a small, tentative step toward normalcy that had now turned into a nightmare. "Which hospital are they taking her to?" he asked, already pulling on his pants, his mind racing to process the information while a cold, paralyzing terror spread through his body. "St. Jude's Medical Center, the main campus," the woman replied, her voice trembling. "My husband is riding with her in the ambulance. We'll take Renata and meet you there." Damien, who had always responded to crises with decisive action and a clear head, found himself frozen for a second. His legs didn't seem to respond correctly. His hands shook as he tried to put on his shoes. Hector, ever efficient, was already starting the car by the time Damien descended the grand staircase. The drive to the hospital was a form of torture. Red lights seemed to last for eternities, The familiar nocturnal streets of the suburbs had never seemed so long. "Valentina Sinclair?" he asked frantically at the emergency room reception desk. "They're working on her now, sir," the nurse replied with practiced calm. "The doctor will come speak with you as soon as they have her stabilized." Stabilized? The word hit Damien like a physical blow. What does that mean exactly? "Please wait in that room. The doctor will inform you of everything." The waiting room, with its plastic chairs and beige walls, was a completely alien universe to a man accustomed to the most luxurious private hospital suites. But at this moment, he didn't even notice the discomfort. His mind was consumed by a single terrifying thought: he could lose her. Without conscious thought, he pulled out his phone and dialed the only number his panic-stricken brain managed to retrieve. Sophia answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep, quickly transforming into alert concern as he, in a voice he barely recognized as his own, explained the situation. "I'm on my way," she said simply, without unnecessary questions, without hesitation. The next 72 hours melted into an agonizing blur. The doctors diagnosed bacterial meningitis, severe, potentially fatal, but treatable if acted upon swiftly. Valentina was moved to the pediatric intensive care unit. Tests, intravenous antibiotics, constant monitoring. Doctors with serious faces who spoke in clinical terms about intracranial pressure and possible neurological damage. Damien, the man who could make boardrooms tremble with a single glance, who had built empires on the force of his will, discovered that all his power, all his wealth, was utterly useless against the fragility of a small body fighting a vicious infection. He couldn't command the white blood cells to work faster. He couldn't threaten the bacteria with lawsuits. He couldn't bribe the fever to come down. For the first time in his adult life, he was completely and utterly powerless. Sophia arrived an hour after his call, her hair hastily pulled back, her face free of makeup. She didn't offer empty words of comfort. She didn't say that everything would be all right when no one could guarantee it. She simply sat beside him, sharing the immense weight of the weight, a constant, silent, grounding presence. When Damien couldn't keep still and paced frantically through the corridors, she walked with him without comment. When he bombarded the doctors with obsessive questions about every procedure, every medication, every possible scenario, she softened the interactions, translating the medical jargon, easing the tension with her calm presence. "You need to get some rest," she told him on the second day, when the shadows under Damien's eyes had become almost black. "You're no good to Valentina if you collapse." "I can't leave her," he replied, his voice raspy from lack of sleep. "You won't. Just rest in that chair while I keep watch. I promise I'll wake you if there's any change at all." Amazingly, he managed to sleep for an hour, waking with a start, his heart pounding. "She's stable," Sophia assured him immediately. "No changes." On the morning of the third day, after a particularly difficult night with a fever spike, the medical team performed a new set of tests. Damien listened to the pediatric neurologist with a stony expression as he explained that, although they were getting the infection under control, there was a possibility of permanent neurological consequences. "It's too soon to know for certain," the doctor explained gently. "But you need to be prepared for the possibility of some cognitive deficits, learning disabilities, even residual epilepsy." When the doctor left, Damien stood motionless in the hallway, staring through the glass window of the room where Valentina lay, small and pale in a bed that seemed far too large for her, connected to machines that beeped and whirred rhythmically. Something inside him finally broke. He walked mechanically to a deserted corner of the corridor, leaned against the wall, and slowly slid down until he was sitting on the floor. His broad shoulders began to tremble. "I can't lose her too," he whispered, hunched over himself in the empty hallway. "Not her." Sophia knelt in front of him, taking his large, trembling hands in hers. They were small in comparison, but surprisingly strong and warm. "Look at me," she said with a gentle firmness, forcing him to raise his head. "You are not going to lose her. She is strong, like you." "I'm not strong," he admitted, his voice cracking, stripped of all pretense. "I'm just controlling. It's different." "No," Sophia contradicted softly. "You survived the unbearable. You built a life after devastation. That is strength, Damien." It was the first time she had ever used his first name, without the formal Mr. Sinclair. That small detail, that unexpected intimacy, was what finally shattered the last barrier. For the first time in 10 years, Damien Sinclair wept, deep, gut-wrenching sobs that seemed to come from a sealed cavern deep inside him. Decades of contained grief, of unprocessed losses, of denied emotions clawed their way out. The regret for all the moments he didn't seize with his wife, the horror of his sister and brother-in-law's deaths, the abject terror of now losing Valentina, the only family he had left. Sophia held him firmly, saying nothing, simply allowing the emotional storm to run its course. Doctors and nurses who passed by discreetly averted their gazes, respecting this moment of raw, unguarded vulnerability. He didn't know how long he remained like that, letting out everything he had kept locked away for so long. When the sobs finally subsided, he felt a profound exhaustion, but also a strange lightness, as if something toxic had been drained from his system. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice hoarse, his eyes swollen, "for being here." Sophia simply nodded, gently wiping a stray tear from his cheek, with a gesture so intimate it stole his breath. "Let's go see Valentina," she said, helping him to his feet. "It does her good to feel our presence, even if she's sedated." That night, sitting beside the hospital bed, they spoke in whispers, not about business or schools, but about loss and fear, about the fragility of life and the armor we build to protect ourselves from pain. Damien told her about Isabel, his wife lost in the yachting accident, about how he had sworn never to feel anything that intensely ever again. Sophia told him about her mother, consumed by cancer when she was just 16, and how that pain had driven her to seek meaningful connections rather than wealth. At 4 in the morning, the night nurse came in to check vitals and smiled faintly. "Her fever is breaking," she announced, "from 103.1 to 100.8 in the last 2 hours. When dawn broke, the first rays of sun filtering through the hospital blinds, Valentina's fever had dropped to 99.1. The medical team, cautiously optimistic, adjusted her treatment. By mid-morning, the little girl opened her eyes briefly, recognized her uncle, and drifted back to sleep. This time a natural sleep, not one induced by sedatives. "That's a very good sign," the doctor commented. "Her neurological response seems appropriate. It's still early, but the signs are promising." That afternoon, while Valentina slept peacefully with her vitals improving across the board, Damien convinced Sophia to go home and rest for a few hours. "You've been here just as long as I have," he insisted. "You need to sleep in a real bed." "I'll be back early tomorrow," she promised, gathering her bag. At the door, she paused and turned back to him. "Damien." "Yes?" "What you saw in Valentina today, that strength to fight when everything seemed impossible, that comes from you. She inherited it from you even if you don't share blood. Never forget that." When the door closed behind her, Damien sat back down beside Valentina's bed. He took her small hand in his, feeling its warmth, the tangible proof that life was still flowing through her veins. "I'm not going to lose you," he whispered, a promise as much to the sleeping child as to himself. "And when you wake up properly, we're going to do things differently. I promise you." Outside the hospital window, the city gleamed under the afternoon sun. The storm had passed, at least for now, but it had permanently changed the interior landscape. Valentina's recovery was slow but steady. After a week in the hospital, the doctors allowed her to be moved home with strict instructions for medication, rest, and follow-up visits. The pediatric neurologist, initially cautious about potential long-term effects, grew more optimistic with each checkup. "Your niece has extraordinary resilience," he commented during the final consultation. "Children constantly surprise us with their capacity to heal." The experience transformed Damien in ways no one could have anticipated. The man who once delegated even the most basic decisions about Valentina's care now personally involved himself in every aspect of her recovery. He completely reorganized his life. He reduced work commitments, transferred major responsibilities to his executive board, and installed a fully equipped office at home to avoid unnecessary travel. "Cancel my trip to Singapore," he instructed his assistant. "They can do the presentation via video conference or send Ramirez in my place." "But sir, it's the most important merger of the year," his assistant protested weakly. "And Valentina is the most important person in my life," he replied simply. "It's non-negotiable." The mansion, once a monument to sterile perfection, began to gradually transform. The heavy curtains remained open during the day, allowing natural light to flood spaces previously kept in controlled dimness. Valentina, as part of her recovery therapy, had started painting in different corners of the house, filling the atmosphere with colorful canvases that clashed beautifully with the minimalist decor. The household staff, initially bewildered by these changes, soon adapted to the new rhythm of the house. Elena, the housekeeper, was the first to understand the transformation. "The house is waking up," she commented one morning to the cook, "as if it's been asleep all these years, just like Mr. Damien." Sophia continued to visit regularly, no longer just as a tutor but as an essential part of the new family nucleus that was forming. The private lessons had evolved into shared reading afternoons, joint art projects, and conversations that extended until dinner time, when Damien would join them. Between them, the initial tension had morphed into something deeper, a mutual understanding, an acceptance of each other's flaws and strengths. Damien admired Sophia's unwavering integrity, her capacity for emotional connection. She respected his discipline, his fierce loyalty to Valentina, and the profound willingness to change he demonstrated daily. The rumors at school had ceased once the story of Valentina's illness became known. The dedication shown by both Sophia and Damien during the crisis had silenced even the most cynical gossips. One spring afternoon, when the dogwood trees were painting Greenwich with their characteristic vibrant white and pink, Damien returned from work to find Sophia and Valentina in the garden. The girl was painting a mural on a wall that had once been impeccably white, while Sophia watched her from a stone bench, a serene expression on her face that stole his breath. The garden, once a showcase of landscape perfection with every plant strategically placed, now overflowed with colorful flowers planted without any apparent pattern. Too messy, he would have thought before, but now they seemed perfect in their natural imperfection. He approached quietly and sat down next to Sophia, watching Valentina immersed in her artistic creation. The girl hummed as she painted, completely absorbed, with streaks of paint on her cheeks and a tranquil smile. "I never thought I could feel this again," he said finally, his voice low, looking not at Sophia but toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning its descent. "I thought that part of me had died with Isabel." Sophia remained silent for a few seconds, understanding exactly what he meant. It didn't need to be named explicitly. "I was afraid of you," she confessed finally. "Not of your power or your money. I was afraid of what you awakened in me." "And now?" he asked, finally turning to look at her. "Now I'm afraid of other things," she smiled faintly. "I'm afraid of what it would be like to live without this life we've built. I'm afraid because I've never been this happy before." The sincerity of her words moved him deeply. In his world of calculated negotiations, where every word was measured for its strategic value, Sophia's raw honesty was like a forgotten language he was relearning. He turned toward her, allowing himself a vulnerability he had never permitted before. "I don't know how to be perfect. I don't know how to love without making mistakes." "No one does," she replied, reaching out to gently touch his face. "We just try, every single day." The contact of her hand on his cheek unleashed something primal in him, a longing he had kept chained for a decade. With an almost imperceptible movement, he turned his face to kiss her palm, a gesture so intimate it felt as if he had crossed an invisible threshold. "Uncle Damien, look what I painted." Valentina's enthusiastic voice broke the moment. The girl came running towards them, her hands stained with bright colors. "It's magnificent," he answered sincerely, looking at the mural depicting 3 figures under a starry sky. He didn't need to ask who they were. That evening, after putting Valentina to bed, he walked Sophia to her car. The night air was filled with the scent of the garden's flowers, more intense now that the day's heat had dissipated. "Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow?" he asked. "Not here. A restaurant, maybe." Sophia looked at him with an amused expression. "Are you asking me on a date, Damien Sinclair?" "Yes," he replied simply. "I believe it's time." "I agree," she smiled, "but on one condition." "I'm listening." "No exclusive restaurants with impossible reservations. I want to take you to a place of my choosing." He smiled, remembering the modest coffee shop where they had their first real conversation. "Deal." As he watched her car drive away down the long, tree-lined driveway, he felt a mixture of anticipation and serenity he hadn't experienced in years. The feeling wasn't the overwhelming intensity of first love, but something more mature and substantial, a recognition that sometimes surrender requires more courage than resistance. Inside the mansion, now illuminated by warm lamps instead of the cold architectural lighting he once preferred, he paused in front of a recent, framed photograph of Valentina. The girl was smiling broadly, without the shadow of sadness that had marked her first years with him. "We're making it," he murmured to himself. For the first time in a decade, Damien Sinclair went to sleep without checking his email, without verifying the Asian stock market, without planning strategies for the next day. Tomorrow would be a new day, and for the first time in a long time, he was eager to live it fully. The wedding took place in the mansion's gardens a year after their first kiss. It was an intimate ceremony, far from the ostentatious display anyone would expect from one of the wealthiest men in America. Only 40 guests attended, a few close friends, the mansion staff who had become like family, teachers from the school, and the few relatives who truly mattered. Valentina, now radiant and completely recovered, was involved in every detail of the planning, insisting on elements that reflected the true essence of their new family. Wildflowers gathered from public parks instead of elaborate arrangements, music performed by talented young students from the local conservatory instead of a renowned orchestra, classic American comfort food prepared by Elena instead of a gourmet caterer. "Are you sure you don't want something more impressive?" his assistant had asked, bewildered by the simplicity of the preparations. "I don't need to impress anyone anymore," Damien had replied with a tranquility that would have been unthinkable a year prior. The transformation of the garden mirrored the transformation of the man. Where perfect symmetry once reigned, a natural exuberance now flourished. The mathematically precise hedges had given way to beds of multicolored flowers that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. Sophia walked toward the makeshift altar under a centennial oak tree, wearing a simple ivory-colored dress that highlighted her natural beauty. She wore no extravagant jewelry, only the small silver hummingbird pendant that was always with her, now alongside an engagement ring with a small, brilliant emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. "I don't want to give you something that screams ownership," Damien had explained when they chose it. "I want something that whispers partnership." Valentina preceded the bride, scattering flower petals with a radiant smile. Dressed in a gown she had helped design herself, combining classic elements with contemporary touches. When it came time for the vows, Damien set aside his carefully prepared speech. He looked directly into Sophia's eyes and spoke with a raw honesty that moved everyone present. "Before I met you, I believed loving meant possessing, controlling, protecting with walls. I was so profoundly wrong." His voice broke slightly. "You taught me that love isn't about possession. It's about liberation. You brought me back to life when I didn't even realize I was only existing." Tears glistened in Sophia's eyes as she listened, holding his hands tightly. "I choose you today, not as the safe harbor after the storm, but as my partner to navigate new waters. I choose you knowing there will be difficult days, knowing we both make mistakes, but committed to growing alongside you every day." When her turn came, Sophia spoke with the same sincerity. "I accept you not despite your scars, but with them. I love you not for what you could be, but for the man you are having the courage to become." Her voice, always so serene, vibrated with contained emotion. "I promise to challenge you when you need it, to hold you up when you falter, and to walk beside you in equality, never behind or in front." There was no elaborate reception or gala ball. After the ceremony, the guests shared a meal at long tables set up under the trees, as the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Valentina recited a poem she had written especially for the occasion, speaking of families that are chosen and built, not just inherited. 6 months after the wedding, the news of a pregnancy brought new joy to the family. The mansion was renovated once more, this time to accommodate a nursery that Valentina insisted on painting herself, with scenes of forests and oceans. "Why these landscapes?" Damien asked, observing the murals in progress. "They're places to explore," the girl explained simply. "I want the baby to know from the very beginning that there's a whole world waiting." One quiet evening in March, as Sophia rested on the patio with a hand on her now noticeably pregnant belly, Damien watched his family with a sense of fulfillment he never thought possible. Something that had been compressed in his chest for 10 years was finally expanding completely. "You changed everything," he said, sitting beside her and intertwining his fingers with hers. "We changed together," Sophia corrected gently. "Neither of us is the same person we were when we met." Valentina, now 12 years old and possessing a confidence and expressiveness that contrasted dramatically with the silent child of before, approached with a new drawing, a complete family under a starry sky, all holding hands. "We're different, but the same," she said with the simple wisdom of childhood as she sat between them. All trying, all learning, Damien smiled, finally at peace. Not because he had found the perfect control he had so desperately sought, but because he had learned at last how to live without it, to accept uncertainty as part of the beauty of being alive. "We have scars," he observed, contemplating the family they had built from the ruins of their previous lives. "Many," Sophia agreed, "and hopes." "Many more," Valentina completed, settling between them naturally. In the distance, the lights of the city began to shine as night fell, 1,000,000 terrestrial stars responding to the celestial ones. The glass mansion, once cold and isolated, now glowed with life from every window. And so they would continue, not as perfect characters in a conventional love story, but as real human beings, with scars, fears, and limitations, learning daily to choose each other, to choose love, to choose the family they had created together. Because in the end, that is true wealth, not what is accumulated in bank accounts or properties, but what is cultivated in the shared spaces between hearts that have found the courage to remain open despite the pain, despite the fear, despite everything.